Hey guys, Gordon here from gCreate. Now today we have an all new video where we're going to show you how to install an E3D V6 All-Metal Hotend on the gMax 1.5 Plus 3D printer. Check it out. Now really the first question you might have is, why do I need an E3D Hotend and what's the deal with all-metal? So there's two things that the E3D can provide. If you go for an all-metal hotend, you can achieve sometimes higher temperatures than the standard J-head. Because of the makeup of the hotend. Now, this means you can print in sometimes higher temp materials such as nylon and some of these new exotic filaments coming out. Now, with that means you have to have active cooling, as you'll see as we start installing this. Active cooling means you need to have a fan blowing on the hotend all the time to make sure it cools. The one drawback is these hotends, in our opinion, they tend to clog a little bit more, so it gives you a little bit more of a headache. But versus, let's say, the J-head, which very rarely clogs, but you do gain the high temp ability. And the second thing is basically pertaining to quality. So a lot of people have asked how they can improve the quality of very small prints. And just by going for a smaller nozzle size, let's say from a 0.5 to a 0.3 or a 0.25, won't necessarily improve quality. The best way to do it would be to go for an E3D hotend. As you see here, the actual flat spot on the hotend around the actual opening is really what matters and what makes your quality a little bit higher. So you'll see the J-head has quite kind of a much larger surface area around the actual opening, whereas the E3D has a very fine, more focused point. And this translates directly into quality for your print, but it also sometimes ruins overhang ability. You know, having a larger flat spot means you can do larger overhangs, but also you can print faster. So again, the E3D is not ideal for every situation, but it does improve quality for smaller prints and allow you to print in other materials. So before jumping right into the E3D tutorial, I should mention that in order to install this, obviously you need the E3D V6 All-Metal Hotend, but you also need to print a longer fan shroud as well as a longer BL Touch bracket if you have a BL Touch installed. So those two can be downloaded from the gCreate download section on the forum. So check them out, download them, and print them before you start this tutorial. So here you see the E3D V6 All-Metal Hotend. It has an active cooling fan that you see here with the blue shroud there. Now, I'm not going to show you how to actually put together the E3D hotend. There's enough tutorials out there. You should definitely check out Tom's guide, where he has a great tutorial on how to actually build the E3D hotend. But one thing to keep in mind is, as you see here, make sure the actual heating element and block is very tight, or you might have leakage of the filament. So the first thing you want to do is remove the LED light bar by removing the two screws that hold it in place. These are pretty easy to take off, so you just drop them out. And keep in mind that if you have the BL Touch sensor, it will fall out as well. And the LED light bar actually just pops right out. If you have an older version, you might have to unscrew that as well. The second thing will be to remove the screws holding the fan shroud in place. And again, this too, as you remove them all the way, the fan shroud should just drop right out. Now, the hotend itself is held in place by two of these M4 screws. You should use an Allen key to unscrew them, and the bolts themselves will drop right out. The nuts on top are actually lock nuts, so they should somewhat stay in place, but if they pop out, just hold them in place with your finger. Now, go ahead and let the hotend drop down, and you can take the screws out, as you see here. And on the tip of the hotend, you'll see there's an aluminum plate that should pop right off. This is useful because you're going to be using it on the new E3D hotend, since they're both the same mount. Next, we want to unscrew the thermistor wires from the terminal board, and this will disconnect the thermistor so we can go ahead and screw in the new wires from the E3D thermistor. And so you unscrew them here, and then the wires will just pop right out. After you've removed the thermistor wire, go ahead and do the same thing for the hotend. You should have a terminal block here, and you can unscrew the leads here, and the wires will pop right out. In older models, you might have a Molex connector, so keep that in mind. Okay, now go ahead and take your all-metal hotend and put the aluminum plate on the top in the groove mount, as you see here. Make sure the opening of the plate is towards the front, so it doesn't hit the BL Touch sensor. And make sure that the recessed or the countersunk holes for the bolts of the plate are towards the bottom. So when you put the bolt in, it's actually flush mount. And as you install the bolt, you might want to hold the nut on top while you screw it in. But go ahead and screw in one side to hold the plate in place, and then just enough so you can go ahead and put the other side in, as you see here. And you're going to go ahead, slide the screw all the way to the top. Make sure it's actually going into the lock nut on top, and the lock nut is flush inside the recessed area in the printed bracket. And then start screwing down both sides to make sure it's level and flush. And keep on screwing. And what you want to do is kind of go back and forth to make sure it's flat and level, and instead of binding up one side. So kind of work your way back and forth. And by the end, the E3D Hotend should be nice and solid to where you can't move it at all. And go ahead and try and route your wires somewhat out of the way so they're not going to be below the actual heater block. And go ahead and take the thermistor wire. If you have the header pins crimped onto it, you can put it onto the actual header block there. Otherwise, you can put it into the screw terminal that we actually took the other wires out of before. And then also go ahead and take your active cooling fan and plug it into the same 2 pins as the LED light bar, which are the pins 3 and 4 from the left side. Go ahead and snap on the cooling fan and then route your wires so that they're out of the way. Now you can go ahead and install the new fan shroud, which is actually longer than the previous one, so you have to make sure you have that printed. And you can get that from our download website. Next, take the heater cartridge wires, which are the red wires. For the E3D, they might be blue. It depends on what version you got. And go ahead and route them to the backside so they're out of the way as well. You might have to loosen the fan shroud just to make sure they can actually fit behind the fan shroud itself. And go ahead and insert them into the terminal blocks that you unscrewed before for the other heater cartridge. Make sure they're nice and flat and solid in there, and the screws are giving a great connection. Now, if you have a BL touch sensor installed in your printer, you're going to want to go ahead and remove it from the existing bracket because the new bracket's actually longer since the E3D Hotend is longer than the J heads. So go ahead and take off the bracket and unscrew the screws here, holding the springs in place as well as a few of the washers. And make sure you take your new bracket, which is a little bit longer, and you can try and keep the bolts in the same spot. You want to make sure that there's a washer on each side of the spring and the spring in between, and then go ahead and screw that into the new bracket. And you'll see here that it sometimes takes a little bit, you got to kind of fish it in there, but make sure that the bolts go in straight, and so that when you actually need to level the BL touch later, it's perpendicular to the bed as opposed to being offset. Now you want to go ahead and reinstall your LED light bar into the LED light bar into the bracket, and connect the BL touch pins if you happen to have them. Make sure, double and triple check that you have the wires in the corresponding orders and they're all connected properly. So white to white, black to black, etc. If these are reversed, you could damage your printer, so take care on that. And what we like to do is put a little piece of gaffer tape on this connection to make sure that it does not come apart. But in the future, if you do need to take it apart, you can actually just take the tape right off. It makes it look better, and it just makes it a little bit more secure. Now, the BL touch bracket sits just between the LED light bar and the extruder bracket itself. So you'll see that we have a spot here in the bracket where you can run the wires so they're out of the way. So make sure they're run in that little groove, and then put the BL touch bracket between the LED bar bracket and the extruder. And you got to look really closely to make sure that your holes are lined up. So as you screw in these screws, it's going through the hole of the bracket. As you can see here, make sure it's pushed all the way up. And then insert the screws. You might need the 3/8 inch screws, which are a little bit longer than the old ones because now your bracket's a little bit further away from the extruder. Once you've screwed it in, make sure everything's nice and tight. And then in the future, if you need to adjust the height of the BL touch sensor, which is basically your 0 point of your extruder, you turn the screws you see here, and the springs will keep it in place. All right, so once you have the E3D installed on the gMax, and you have the longer fan shroud as well as the longer BL touch bracket if you need it, you're not quite ready yet. The firmware was set up to use the standard J head Hotend temperatures. So what you really need to do is tell it that because the E3D can go to a much higher temperature, you have to open up the firmware and change one variable basically. So if you're not using the BL touch sensor, you also need to change the height of the Z-axis end stop. So you might have to to lower it or adjust it so that the hot end doesn't drive into the bed. Now, when it comes to installing the firmware, check out our other videos on actually how to upload it, but I just want to show you the settings you have to change. So if you download the latest firmware from our forum and go to the configuration.h tab, you'll see, as you scroll down, you'll see that we still use the 100K thermistor for the E3D, so you should be fine on that. But you'll notice that there's a spot here that says define heater 1 max temp, and that's 245 degrees. Now, we set it to about 300 for the E3D. I believe it can go a little bit beyond that, but check their website for the actual specs. But if you don't set this number higher, then the actual hot end will cut out at 245 anyway. So if you're trying to go to 300, it won't actually work. So make sure that you set this to be a higher temp, and then go ahead and upload this to the gMax, and you should be good to go. So go ahead and auto home the printer, and you'll see the pin for the BL Touch drop down and touch the bed. While it's doing this, I like to go to the prepare, and then move axis, move by 0.1 millimeter, and then move Z command. Now what you should see is that the extruder is 1.9 millimeters above the bed. This is the default height for the BL Touch. You want to make sure you go down to 0, and then when you're at 0, the tip of the nozzle should be just about a business card away from the extruder. If it's not, you might need to raise or lower it by turning that same knob, and as you raise or lower to get to just the right height, this will tell you how much you need to adjust the BL Touch sensor by. So if it's a negative value, you might have to raise it, or vice versa. Now, when you start your print, you should always go to the Tune menu and do Baby Step Z if you need to do any fine adjustments for the first layer. If you're constantly doing this, you're going to need to adjust the BL Touch height. But if not, then you should see a perfect first layer go down, nice and thick, and it shouldn't be too far or too close to the bed. And by the time your print finishes, you'll see the E3D did a great job printing the model. And here you see the last little layer. And if you have your first layer set just right, when it comes time to scrape it off the bed, it should pop right off. We like to do kind of popping and kind of tapping actions as opposed to a really harsh hit, and this usually makes the model pop off perfectly. So here you see the end result of using the E3D. This is the 0.6 millimeter nozzle, and it's a fantastic nozzle, and it really does print really nicely. So really that's it on how to install the E3D V6 All-Metal Hotend on the gMax 1.5 Plus. The printer was designed to handle many of the different extruders out there as long as they use the standard groove mount design. You might need to, as you saw earlier, you have to sometimes tweak the firmware, or you might have to print larger or longer brackets or longer fan shrouds. But every day we're trying to experiment with new hot ends and make sure that our printer works with all of them. So hope you enjoyed the video. Please keep trying out the E3D hot ends. They're great. It's probably the easiest way to improve quality if you're trying to do very specific small parts, because the tips on the E3D are very nice and very they have a very small kind of opening or a very small flat spot. So they print really well, and we've been very happy with them so far. They're a little trickier sometimes than the J-heads just because of the active cooling. So sometimes you really have to make sure that your print is starting out just right. Whereas the J-head, you can kind of throw anything through it, and it really just prints nonstop. But aside from that, the E3D has been a great hot end, so hopefully this tutorial helped you get going on them. Keep on printing, everyone.